Greg Hunt, good morning, welcome.
Good morning, Barry.
$1,300 per household per year and no compensation.
Well, it's untrue. And it's untrue for a couple of reasons. Firstly, and most importantly, our policy is capped at $3.2 billion over 4 years. The first 3 years, for example, I can tell you exactly what we will spend. $300 million, $500 million, $750 million. That's a fixed cost. We control that. We're not going to spend a dollar more.
Let's go to the independent umpire on this, the Australian Industry Greenhouse Network. That includes companies like BHP, Rio Tinto, the Australian Industry Group. Now, they say that it's going to cost, your plan will cost twice as much as the government's.
Actually, that's incorrect. I have seen the email which was sent by the AIGN to all their members on Friday, as it was, I think, and the message there was they had made no comment about the Coalition's policy. Let me set this up very clearly. Our approach is a fixed amount of expenditure to clean up Australia, in Australia, by doing real things, without a tax which is effectively an electricity tax, and without a massive expenditure of $3.5 billion a year on overseas carbon credits. I think Australians would be amazed to know that we pay the tax in Australia essentially through higher electricity charges, and then we also have to go and buy an additional $3.5 billion a year of foreign carbon credits overseas. That's because the government system won't reduce emissions in Australia. It relies on an electricity tax which is ineffective. We'll do real things and we'll do it at a fixed cost, and we won't change that.
Yeah, but that's where this assertion that your program would cost double the government's is on this issue of foreign carbon permits. Do you regard that as a completely pointless exercise?
Well, I think there's a best case and a worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that Australia will transfer $3.5 billion a year by 2020 to maybe cleaning up an Indian coal-fired power station so they can continue to use coal in India. Maybe building a new Russian nuclear plant. The worst case scenario is that you have this massive fraud, as you've seen in Europe in the last year, where in Norway, of all countries, one of the most sophisticated countries in the world, they've had a $5 billion fraud according to the Australian Crime Commission. In Italy, the mafia was engaged in the process, so much so that they declared one of the Dons Lord of the Winds.
But hang on, are you saying that international carbon credits are a pointless exercise?
You can have things which work and you can have things that don't.
Well,
but the idea...
Tony Abbott's description. Do you agree with it? It's pointless?
What the government is proposing is pointless because Australian emissions will go up. And here's the great deception. The government says it's looking to clean up the Australian economy. It's not. What it's doing is it's sending $3.5 billion. It'll go from taxpayers, your listeners, in the form of higher electricity charges through companies that have to purchase foreign carbon credits. Many of them are likely to be of dubious provenance, and the best case scenario is they're not cleaning up the Australian economy, they're driving up the cost of operating the Australian economy and doing something to maybe allow the Indians to use coal-fired power but in a slightly different form.
Yeah, but does it matter, though? Does it matter where the pollution is reduced, as long as it's reduced? It doesn't matter that it's reduced in Australia. If it's reduced in India, then you get the same effect.
Well, unfortunately, there are two problems with that. The first is the level of fraud which the Australian Crime Commission warned of this year, whether it is the example of Norway or what we see in Hungary, where there was an enormous Ponzi scheme in carbon credits this year, or in Italy.
You've already explained that, but you're saying that you can't have carbon trading without fraud.
No, what I am saying is the international system at the moment is extremely undeveloped. The 85% of global carbon credits are coming out of Europe, which has had a massive fraud. The Treasury modelling predicts that 50% will come from either Russia or other parts of Asia. Many countries which are expected to be providing the carbon credits are at the absolute top of the international transparency lists of countries which have no ability to provide proper transparency. We want to clean up Australia. They want to send money overseas. And that is the difference. And they want to do it by driving up the cost of electricity. And that's the fundamental flaw. They're not going to clean up Australian power stations. They're not going to clean up emissions here. They're going to transfer huge volumes of funds overseas. And that, by the way, is why the advertising is misleading and why we are going to write to the Prime Minister and ask the Prime Minister to pull a $25 million taxpayer-funded advertising campaign.
There's not much chance of that. You say that you want them to clean up Australia, but it's about the world. It's about cleaning up the world. So as I go back to the point, does it matter where this takes effect, as long as it takes effect?
Well, if you were raising $105 billion in taxes between now and 2020, you'd hope that it might perhaps clean up Australia. And that's the problem with the government system. It's not cleaning up Australia. Best case scenario is that we are sending, by 2020, $3.5 billion, which might help with a new Russian nuclear power station, or it might help clean up an Indian coal-fired power station, but it's not going to clean up Australia, and the government's not been honest about that, and nor are they giving the people the chance to make that decision, which they should.
So what do you say to industry who want more opportunities to trade overseas, not less?
Well, what industry wants is either no carbon tax or a carbon tax at a dramatically lower price. And
the opportunity to use international credits.
If you have our system, you don't need to do that, because all we're doing is providing incentives to clean up Australia. What the government is doing is lifting the operating cost in terms of electricity, in terms of gas, in terms of transport for the whole economy, and therefore, in order to actually reduce emissions, they've still got to go offshore. And that's a very odd situation, which is completely at odds with their rhetoric and their advertising, and in particular, their modelling assumes that the United States will have a fully integrated, effective cap and trade or carbon tax system by 2016, which is a fantasy. They should reintroduce the modelling this week, give the Australian people time to respond to it through the Joint Select Committee, give them a month to respond. What most people wouldn't know is they've got 4 working days to respond to the wrong carbon price, the wrong assumptions about the United States, and to get it into a Joint Select Committee or have no say ever, because they will never get a vote under this government.
Another assertion of Tony Abbott's is that the carbon tax spells the death of the coal industry. Do you agree with that?
Well, it is designed to reduce consumption in Australia dramatically, and it has a real impact on many mines. The government's own modelling shows that there are a significant number of mines which are likely to close.
But if that's the case, why has the coal industry effectively doubled the amount of money that it's spent on exploration in the last 12 months?
Look, I can't judge for individual firms, but I can judge the intent, the design, the structure of this whole carbon tax is to increase the operating costs of the economy, to drive business offshore in many cases. I know that there are cement manufacturers that are considering moving to Indonesia. If we talk about the planet, sending emissions offshore to Indonesia and in some cases increasing their actual production is bad for the planet as well as bad for the economy.
Well, you're talking about sending emissions to Indonesia. Let's talk about the asylum seekers policy now. Tony Abbott's policy is to turn around the boats and send asylum seekers to Indonesia. What human rights clause could you add into the Migration Act that would allow that to happen?
Well, that is only done, would only ever be done, if there were total safety and if there were complete guarantees of safety. We did it
no, it's
under
not a safety
the Howard
issue,
government.
it's a human rights issue. These people will be sent back to Indonesia. They don't sign up to anything. So what human rights clause could you include in the bill that would make that legal?
Well, we would deal with this first and foremost from a position of ensuring that the 1951 Convention, the heart of which says people cannot be sent back to their country of origin for danger, to make sure those conditions are abided wherever we deal with this challenge. The government, and I think this is probably not known to your viewers, the government has stripped out the 1951 Convention, which is the Refugee Convention protections, from its legislation, and there is no protection against sending people back to persecution, the very purpose of international refugee law. This is a first for Australia, and I am not sure of any other developed country, and I would challenge the Prime Minister to name another developed country which is now looking at returning people to their country of origin to face persecution.
Yeah,
we can provide safety and we can stop the trade in people which leads to drownings. That's what's the real issue here.
But how,
and we can do it in a fair and humane way.
What guarantees can you give the asylum seekers if you send them back to Indonesia?
That's part of the policy, that we have to make sure that people are protected, firstly from being sent in boats where there will be drownings. We warned about a Christmas Island tragedy before it occurred, and it did, and the government turned a blind eye. Nobody wanted it. Nobody wanted it.
This is the issue about what happens to them when they get back to Indonesia. How can you guarantee that they won't be subject to human rights abuses in Indonesia?
Well, our approach is to ensure that we have guarantees for people who are part of any movement in or out of Australia, and that's why we want to focus on Nauru, and that's why we would say to the government, we have a solution which will both be effective and humane, and what they are looking at is breaching all of the Australian obligations and duties under the 1951 Convention.
You're obviously not satisfied that these people will be treated properly in Malaysia, despite what the Malaysians say?
Look, there are over, as I understand it, 30,000 canings a year in Malaysia. Malaysia has its own system, we respect that, but we are not going to be sending people back to that situation.
But there's now an agreement in place, it's been in place for about 2 years now, with the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, that refugees in Malaysia will not be detained and they'll not be caned. Now, do you not take them on their word?
We do not believe, having had Scott Morrison visit the camps, having had Scott see the situation on the ground, that the circumstances in Malaysia meet the duty of care that we have. That's why in Nauru, where we would have responsibility, we would have a set of situation or a circumstance where people have good, safe conditions. We are confident, we have responsibility, we are in a position to take care of people, but it is about a genuine deterrent rather than something which is A, capped with 800 places, and B, it's not necessarily appropriate in terms of the conditions.
But I do want to go to the assertions you made about Malaysia. The Home Affairs Minister raised this question during the week, a question directly directed at the opposition. Are you telling us that Malaysia is worse than human traffickers?
What we are saying is this, that we think that there is a solution which is not capped in terms of Nauru, which is guaranteed in terms of the human rights conditions, and which is proven in terms of its success. It is better, it is preferable, and by the way, Julia Gillard not only obviously ruled out a carbon tax before the election, but she ruled out expressly sending people to countries which were not signatories to the 1951 Convention. Her words, her conditions, her mandate, and we've got a better alternative.
Okay, so you don't amend the Act, and you think you can send people to Nauru and that will survive High Court challenges, even though you could call as witnesses people who spent years on Nauru and have still got the psychological scars to show for it?
Well, we do believe that the Nauruan solution would stand up. We're happy
but why not remove all doubt?
We're happy to work with the government if they look at our amendments. Now, let me make it clear, though, our goal here is to provide an effective deterrent but a humane outcome. Because if people get onto boats, there will be drownings. And we must never forget that the consequence of a large flow of people coming to Australia is a significant number of people whose lives will be lost at sea.
Okay, so just to sum up then, you will not be supporting the bill?
I think in its current form it is exceptionally unlikely that we will support the bill. There's still a Cabinet and party room process. What's my view? I think that it is a bad deal, badly framed by a bad government.
And you'll be voting with the Greens to vote it down?
Well, we will not give this government a blank cheque. They wanted blank cheques on so many other things, whether it was home insulation or green loans, and every time they seek a blank cheque, it bounces.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.